Maybe if you spent less time playing detective and more time doing actual nursing, you wouldn't need a security escort out of here by Friday. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 47 minutes before 200 military personnel in dress uniforms walked through Seattle General's main entrance. The fluorescent lights hum their endless mechanical song. Antiseptic hangs in the air like a ghost that never leaves. Danielle Ross moves through the oncology wing with hands steady as surgical lasers, her blue scrubs immaculate, her movements the kind of efficient that makes her invisible to most people. For bag to for bag. Room to room. Blood pressure cuff. Temperature check. Notes in the chart. The work of keeping people alive when the body wants to stop fighting. Nobody watches the nurse who keeps her head down. Room 347 is where the veteran waits. Same as every shift for the past 4 months. His name is Marcus Chen, age 38, admitted with complications from a traumatic brain injury sustained 7 years ago during a deployment in Marjah that official records have essentially erased. He lies in the hospital bed with his forearm exposed, and tattooed in block military letters across his skin is a single word, Ross. He stares at Danielle as she changes his for, and there is nothing behind his eyes. No recognition. No flicker of memory. Just the flat, distant gaze of a man whose brain has locked away everything from the before time, everything from the moment an IED tore through his convoy and left him broken on a road he couldn't remember anymore. Danielle has learned not to expect anything else. His chart says traumatic brain injury with severe anterograde amnesia. His brain cannot form new memories past 2017. Everything after that, every face, every name, every person who held him while he screamed, is a closed door. She adjusts the drip rate without speaking. The medication flows clear and steady through the fall line. Her fingers work the mechanical precision of someone who has done this 10,000 times, and her jaw remains perfectly still when Marcus looks directly at her and then looks away, cataloguing her as just another white coat in the endless parade of strangers. All set, she says softly. Let me know if you need anything. He nods. Doesn't speak. Doesn't recognize the person who carried him 11 kilometers through enemy fire with an 7.62 round in her own leg, who didn't stop running until the helicopter blades were so close she could see the pilots' faces, who whispered his name the whole way even though she knew the odds had already done their mathematics. Danielle closes the chart and exits the room with the same careful pace she maintains on every floor, every shift. The limp is almost imperceptible now. Most people don't notice. The ones who do never mention it. The staff locker room smells like industrial detergent and old coffee. Rows of grey metal lockers line the walls, each one identical, each one locked with a small silver key. Danielle opens hers, locker 247, the same locker for 3 years, and reaches past her spare scrubs, past the uniform she keeps folded in the back just in case, to the very bottom where she keeps the thing nobody knows about. Combat boots. Old ones. Leather the color of weathered tobacco, cracked and stained with sand from a desert that exists in a lifetime she is no longer supposed to claim. The leather is rough under her fingertips, textured by countless miles of patrols, checkpoint rotations, and one particular 14-hour extraction run with a bleeding Marine in her arms and incoming fire close enough to feel the heat displacement. She presses her palm flat against the worn leather. Holds it there. Her eyes close for exactly 3 seconds. When she opens them again, the moment is over. Locker closes. Boots hidden once more. Danielle turns to leave, and that is when the elevator doors at the end of the corridor slide open and Dr. Whitfield emerges like a shark that has caught the smell of blood in the water. He is tall in the way that privilege makes men tall, shoulders back, chest forward, the kind of posture that says every room belongs to him automatically. His white coat is pristine. His watch costs more than Danielle's car. The tablet under his arm glows with something he has been studying intently, something that makes the small muscles around his eyes tighten with the kind of fury that comes from nearly being caught. The medication discrepancy in room 412 3 days ago was small. A fentanyl dose documented but never administered, caught by Danielle's meticulous charting system, flagged in the digital record with the kind of precision that would have triggered an automatic DEA review if anyone in administration had been paying attention to anything besides their quarterly bonus projections. She had followed protocol, documented the discrepancy, reported it through proper channels to the pharmacy director. Nobody had thanked her for it. Nurse Ross. His voice carries across the corridor like a command. Like the sound of a door slamming shut. Grand rounds. Now. We're doing oncology walkthrough and I want the day shift nurses present. All of you. It is not a request. It is not even phrased as a question. Danielle nods once and moves toward the elevator, and Dr. Whitfield's eyes follow her with the intensity of a man calculating risk. The grand rounds room is crowded with resident physicians in white coats, medical students with fresh notebooks, attendings from other departments, and a handful of nurses who have learned that objections to attendance are career-ending conversations. The room smells like coffee and ambition and the particular tension that comes from hierarchical violence masquerading as education. Dr. Whitfield stands at the center like a conductor before his orchestra. His tablet glows. His eyes scan the room until they land on Danielle standing at the back, partially hidden behind a senior resident. Let me tell you something about protocol, Dr. Whitfield announces. His voice is loud enough for all 40 people in the room to hear clearly. Loud enough that people in the hallway stop walking. Protocol exists for a reason. It protects patients. It protects us. But protocol only works when people follow it. He pauses. Lets the silence build. When people decide they know better. When people decide they can skip steps. When people decide to play detective instead of doing their actual jobs, that is when mistakes happen. That is when people get hurt. And you know who that impacts. He points directly at Danielle. Nurse Ross here. Excellent charting skills. Meticulous documentation. But instead of clearing a medication discrepancy through proper channels first, instead of consulting with the pharmacy director before making accusations, she went straight to documenting it in a way that makes it look like there was something improper happening in my unit. His voice drops. Becomes almost conversational. More dangerous. There was no impropriety, Nurse Ross. There was a simple documentation error. A simple, routine error that you turned into an investigation. He looks around the room at the 40 people watching. This is what happens when people don't understand the chain of command. When they don't understand that accusation without confirmation is gossip. Is slander. Is the kind of thing that can destroy a career. Danielle stands perfectly still. Her hands are at her sides. Her breathing remains steady. The trembling that wants to happen, the anger, the injustice, the knowledge that she protected patient safety and is being publicly executed for it, all of that stays locked behind her ribs where it cannot be seen. She does not look away. Dr. Whitfield holds her gaze for a long moment, clearly expecting something. A flinch. An apology. A tear. Something that would give him dominance. Her face remains a mask of stone. He turns back to the residents. Let's move on. Next case presentation. The weight in the room lightens slightly. People begin making notes. The moment passes but does not disappear. It settles into the air like scar tissue. 2 hours later, Danielle is standing at the vending machine on the first floor, feeding coins for a bottle of water she does not really want but needs the excuse to stand somewhere alone for 90 seconds. The machine hums and clicks. The bottle drops. The footsteps behind her are deliberate. 2 sets of them. She recognizes the sound before turning. One is Margaret from administration, the other is David Chen from hospital compliance. Both are walking toward her with the kind of grim determination that comes from being tasked with delivering bad news and being told to do it in public. Danielle, can we talk? Margaret's voice is falsely cheerful. The way people sound when they are reading from a script someone else wrote. Of course. Danielle turns. The water bottle is cold in her hand. We have received a couple of concerns about your clinical practice, David says. His clipboard is already in his hands. Nothing formal yet, just some conversations we are having with staff about workflow and communication patterns. Margaret adds, louder, loud enough for the hallway to hear, loud enough for the nurses at the station 30 feet away to turn and watch. Maybe if you spent less time playing detective and more time focusing on actual patient care, you wouldn't be creating such a tense environment for the team. The words are chosen very carefully. Tense environment. Playing detective. The kind of phrases that, once in an HR file, make future problems exponentially worse. We are going to have security walk you out by Friday, David continues, reading from his clipboard like it is a weather report. Just a precaution. Just standard procedure for situations where there has been some conflict with the medical team. Danielle looks at both of them. Margaret will not meet her eyes. David is reading from the paper in his hands as though she is not standing in front of him at all. I understand, Danielle says. Her voice is very quiet. Very even. Friday. Security escort. Thank you for letting me know. She turns back to the vending machine. Opens her water. Takes a drink. Behind her, she hears Margaret and David walking away, their voices already moving on to the next thing, the next problem, the next person who needs to understand that there are rules about how high you are allowed to climb before someone pulls you back down. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is that nobody in the hallway who witnessed that moment, and there were 6 people who did, comes to ask if she is okay. Nobody says anything. Nobody makes eye contact. Because looking at someone that catastrophe has touched is contagious, and the smart move is to stay clean. The shift ends at 8 o'clock. Danielle clocks out and walks to the parking garage where her 2009 Subaru Outback waits in the same spot it has waited in for 3 years. She drives home to an apartment that is so sparse it looks like it belongs to someone who is always ready to leave. No pictures on the walls. No furniture that cannot be packed in a day. She sits in her car in the parking garage for 7 minutes after turning off the engine. Does not move. Does not breathe differently. Just exists in the silence of the vehicle with her hands on the steering wheel. Then she gets out and goes upstairs. The next morning, she returns to Seattle General and moves through her shift like nothing happened. She changes fours. She takes vital signs. She documents everything with the same meticulous precision that got her into trouble in the first place. In room 347, Marcus Chen stares at her without recognition, and Danielle does not let herself imagine what it would be like if he remembered. What it would be like to not be a stranger in her own former life. During her break, she goes to the supply closet where she knows she will be alone. It is a small room filled with boxes of gloves, sterile wrapping, bandage supplies, and in the corner, a single shelf where the old equipment is stored. She closes the door behind her and leans against it. The supply closet is quiet. She opens her locker again. Takes out the combat boots. Holds them in both hands like they are made of something precious and breakable. The leather is soft in the places where her hands have touched it. Hard and cracked everywhere else. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross was supposed to disappear 5 years ago. The official story was that she died in a classified operation. The real story was that she was extracted from Marjah after one particular mission went wrong, and the military scrubbed her existence from every database, every file, every official record. She became a ghost. She became invisible. She became exactly the kind of person nobody looks at. She became a nurse. For 5 years, she has moved through the world as someone harmless. Someone unremarkable. Someone with no power and no past. And then yesterday, they told her she had until Friday to disappear. Danielle closes her eyes and presses her forehead against the worn leather of the boots, breathing in the ghost of Afghanistan, dust and metal and the particular smell of desert that never entirely washes out of anything it touches. When she opens her eyes again, her face is perfectly still. The code blue alarm shattered the night shift silence at 02 for 7 hours. 3 short bursts, then continuous wailing. Danielle's hands froze mid-chart entry, the pen suspended above her notes, and then muscle memory, older than her nursing license, deeper than any protocol, took over. She was moving before her conscious mind caught up. The limp that had plagued her all shift, the careful weight distribution she'd maintained for 12 hours, vanished. Adrenaline burned through her system like rocket fuel, and she moved the way she'd moved through Marjah, economical, precise, without hesitation. Room 347. The veteran. Her body already knew before the resident shouted the room number over the intercom. She rounded the corner at a speed that made the younger nurses stare, her shoes gripping the tile with the kind of traction that only came from proper boots. The hospital issued soft-soled nonsense, but Danielle had always kept her older pair in the locker, the leather mold to her feet by 1,000 miles of desert running and combat corridors. She pushed through the double doors into the trauma bay and stopped breathing for exactly 1 second. The chest was already open. An emergency thoracotomy, already performed, which meant someone had made the decision that this man was worth cracking ribs for. But Dr. Whitfield stood at the bedside, his hands hovering uselessly over the exposed cavity, his fingers trembling in the harsh fluorescent light. The attending surgeon, Dr. Chen, was scrubbed and ready, but she was still pulling on her second glove. The resident was frozen. A nurse was recording vitals with the mechanical precision of someone running on autopilot. The heart wasn't beating. It was just laying there, quivering uselessly like a fish suffocating in air. "Somebody do something," the resident whispered, his voice cracking like a boy's. Danielle didn't speak. She simply moved. Whitfield was in her way, and she shoulder-checked him aside without breaking stride, her 145-pound frame hitting his 190 with the focused force of someone who'd trained for it. He stumbled backward, his mouth opening in protest, but she was already at the table, already stripping off one glove and reaching into the chest cavity with her bare hand. The ribs were spread wide, the intercostal muscles exposed like something anatomical from a textbook. The pericardium was already open. The heart lay in her palm like a failing bird, and muscle memory, 12 years of it, 3 tours of it, 1,000 field operations in the dust and heat of Marjah, took over completely. Direct cardiac massage. Not CPR. Not the chest compressions you gave in the ER. This was the procedure you performed when the chest was already open and time was already dead and you had nothing left but your hands and whatever you'd learned in places the world didn't know existed. She began to compress. Her movements were precise, deliberate, surgical in their exactness. Not frantic. Not panicked. The kind of calm that only came from having already survived the worst. Compress. Release. Compress. Release. The rhythm of it was meditation and violence all at once. She could feel the heart responding, could sense the change in elasticity as oxygenated blood began moving through chambers that had been still 30 seconds ago. "O2 sat?" she asked. 68 and dropping, the nurse responded, her voice steadying now that someone was giving orders. "Push epi. 1 milligram 4. Dr. Chen was beside her now, gloved and ready, her eyes wide. "Who are you calling for orders?" "I'm calling for epi," Danielle said flatly, not looking up. Her hands continued their rhythm. Compress. Release. Compress. The heart was responding now, the flutter becoming more organized, something that might actually be called rhythm beginning to take shape. His heart stopped during the thromboembolism. Massive PE. You need heparin running, norepinephrine for pressure support, and someone needs to call cardiothoracic because this man needs an emergency pulmonary embolectomy or he won't make it to sunrise. The room moved. The attending surgeon moved. The residents moved. Even Whitfield moved, backing toward the door with his face the color of old snow. Danielle compressed. The heart beat once under her fingers. Twice. A third time, this time with conviction, with actual muscular force. The monitor began to show something resembling sinus rhythm. Not good rhythm, not yet, but rhythm that suggested the possibility of rhythm. "That's organized activity," Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with something that might have been awe or might have been shock. Heart rate 92. Blood pressure coming up, 78/50 and climbing. Let's keep him here, Danielle said, finally removing her hand from the chest cavity. The blood was warm and sticky, coating her forearm to the elbow. She'd been covered in worse. She looked at Dr. Chen. Attend the wound. I'll step back. But as she moved away from the table, as she peeled off her glove and reached for a towel, she caught Whitfield watching her from the doorway. His face had shifted into something new. Not rage. Not humiliation. Something far more dangerous. Something calculating. He pulled out his phone as he left the room. The next 4 hours blurred into the work that saved lives. Danielle helped close the chest with the attending surgeon while a cardiothoracic team was mobilized from the university hospital. She ran the ventilator settings, tracked the dopamine infusion, and stood by while a second four was placed in case they needed to push additional medication. The veteran's vitals stabilized. His oxygen saturation climbed to 94. His blood pressure normalized. By 05:11 hours, he was packaged for transfer to the university's CQ, cardiac intensive care unit, and loaded into a transport team's care. She'd just finished cleaning the trauma bay, disposing of blooded drapes and used equipment, when Whitfield appeared at the doorway. His phone was in his hand, and his expression was fixed in the kind of pleasant smile that made her skin cold. "Remarkable work tonight, Nurse Ross," he said. His voice was smooth, almost friendly. "Though I did notice you didn't wait for my authorization before administering medication." "The patient was in cardiac arrest," she replied flatly. "Medication was indicated." "Of course. Of course." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "However, I've been thinking about our conversation from earlier. The one where I explained the importance of chain of command. And it occurs to me that your continued presence here might be creating a morale issue." She cleaned the counter. Bleach and water, the sharp smell of it cutting through the copper scent of blood. She said nothing. "I've made some calls," he continued, watching her work. "To the board president. To some colleagues at the state medical board. Described some concerns I have about your employment history. About the gaps in your background. About some questionable judgment calls I've observed." Now she looked at him. For exactly 1 second, her eyes met his, and something flickered across her face, not fear, not anger, not any of the emotions he was probably expecting. Something colder. Something that made him take a small step backward, though he disguised it as a casual shift in posture. "I've also informed HR that you won't be needed for the next few days," he said, recovering his smile. "Pending a full background review. I'm sure it's all perfectly innocent, but we have to be thorough. I'm sure you understand." She returned to cleaning the counter. "You saved that man's life tonight," Whitfield continued, his voice taking on a lighter tone, almost conversational. "Which is admirable. It's also why I wanted to give you a heads up before the formal process begins. If you were to resign quietly, I could." "No," she said. "I'm sorry." "I said no. I'm not resigning." He stood there for a moment, his pleasant expression frozen in place. Then he nodded slowly. "As you wish. We'll proceed with the investigation." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Danielle stood alone in the trauma bay, her bloody glove disposed of, the counter bleached clean. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song. She could hear the monitors in the adjacent rooms, the distant sound of a nurse's voice on the intercom calling for transport, the ordinary sounds of a hospital at work. But in this room, there was only silence and the smell of antiseptic and the ghost of blood she'd been covered in minutes before. She pulled off her mask and set it aside. Her jaw clenched once, barely perceptible to anyone who might have been watching. But no one was watching. She was alone. Her shoulder throbbed where the shrapnel hadn't hit, where it was going to hit, where it was meant to hit, in the future that was rushing toward her now like an unseen vehicle in the dark. She could feel the timeline shifting, the careful balance she'd maintained for 5 years tilting toward collapse. Whitfield was going to dig. Whitfield was going to find inconsistencies. Whitfield was going to discover that Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross didn't officially exist anymore, had been erased from every database the military maintained, and that asking questions about her would get him conversations with people who didn't explain things very clearly. Which meant he was going to escalate. Which meant the next 3 hours would change everything. The 0320 code on the monitors woke the whole floor. Not the monitors themselves, those bleated constantly, a white noise so persistent that nurses learned to filter it out like fluorescent hum, but the asterisk pattern asterisk of them. Multiple alarms in sequence. The rhythm of panic. Danielle was 2 rooms down restocking crash carts when she heard it, room 347. The veteran. His voice came next, raw, unfractured, a sound that belonged to no hospital. That belonged to Marjah. She moved without thinking. Her feet carried her down the corridor before her mind caught up, muscle memory overriding the chain of command. The door to 347 swung open and she saw him thrashing against the cardiac lead still taped to his chest, his post-surgical bandages tearing at the edges, his hands clawing at the air like he was trying to dig out of a grave. His eyes were not seeing this room. They were seeing something else. Someone else. The heart monitor screamed at 148 beats per minute, irregular, the rhythm of a brain drowning in cortisol and adrenaline. Marine. Her voice dropped an octave. Not the voice of the nurse they all knew. The other voice. The one she'd buried 5 years ago. Stand down. You're stateside. You're safe. He didn't hear her. His hands were reaching for the belongings bag beside his bed, personal effects from the VA, a cardboard rectangle of his former life that nobody had properly screened when he arrived. His fingers closed around something metallic. She watched his hand move from the bag toward his chest and her pupils dilated because she knew that shape. A shard. A fragment. The kind of thing a man keeps as a talisman when he's spent 15 years trying to convince himself he survived for a reason. The grenade had detonated in Sanjin Valley in 2008, and he'd pocketed a piece of it, and nobody had ever searched his belongings carefully enough to find it. She had 3 seconds. His shaking hands were compressing the mechanism. Metal on metal. The deteriorated fuse inside that fragment was not stable. It had been exposed to desert humidity and sweat and the pressure of a man's guilt for a decade and a half. The physics of it were simple. Force equals reaction. His hands were applying force. Danielle crossed the room in 4 strides. Not running. Controlled. The way you move when you understand that violence can happen in the space between one breath and the next. I need you to, she started. The blast came from nowhere. It came from everywhere. The room filled with sound like a thunderclap compressed into a space 8 feet by 12. The grenade fragment, deteriorated and unstable, detonated with the force of something that should have been rendered inert years ago but never was. Hot metal screamed through the air. A piece of shrapnel the size of a bottle cap caught the fluorescent light fixture and sent sparks raining down like tiny meteors. Another shard passed so close to Danielle's face she felt the heat of it, the whistle of air molecules being violently displaced. The largest piece, jagged and smoking, buried itself in her left shoulder. The pain was information. Pain is data. She'd been taught that in the mountains of Kuna province by a special forces medic who'd worked on her after an IED blast left her leg bleeding into her boot. The pain meant the wound was real. The pain meant she was still conscious. The pain meant she could still move, could still act could still be useful. She threw herself across the veteran's body, pressing him down into the mattress, her right hand pinning his chest to the bed, her left shoulder screaming as the shrapnel shifted deeper into the muscle. Blood, his blood from the blast, her blood from the wound, sprayed across the white sheets in a pattern that looked almost artistic if you weren't looking at it in the context of a human being who'd already survived one grenade and shouldn't have to survive another one ever again. Lock down this room. Her voice cut through the ringing in her ears. Commands. Not requests. Get the bomb squad. VA police. I need a trauma surgeon in here in 2 minutes. Somebody get the portable defibrillator. Do it *now star. The night nurse, a traveler named Marcus who was 3 weeks into his first contract, froze in the doorway. Danielle's eyes met his for exactly 1 second, and that was enough. He'd heard it too. The shift in her voice. The thing that happened when someone who'd been pretending to be small suddenly decided to take up space. Marcus moved. He pulled the emergency cord and shouted into the hallway, and Danielle kept her body pressed across the veteran's chest, not moving, not flinching, her shoulder bleeding into both their hospital gowns, her blood mingling with his surgical drainage. The pain was white noise. Everything else was focus. Security arrived first. 2 officers in polo shirts who'd never seen live ordnance in their lives. Behind them came Dr. Chen from trauma, the good one, the one who'd trained overseas. Behind them came the facility director, looking like she'd been pulled from bed in the middle of a nightmare, which she had. The whole floor was awake now, lights blazing, the controlled chaos of a hospital remembering what it was built for. Lives in the balance. Machines beeping their urgent songs. And in the center of it all, a nurse in blood-soaked scrubs, one hand still pressed against a veteran's chest, her shoulder decorated with shrapnel, her voice steady as a surgical laser. Shrapnel embedded approximately 4 centimeters above the shoulder joint, posterior angle, she said to Dr. Chen. No visible arterial involvement but significant muscle trauma. He's got a contusion pattern suggesting the blast originated from the bed beside him. Fragment detonation, not ballistic. Ordnance involved. Military explosive. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. He understood what she was saying without her having to say it all. This was not a random accident. This was a piece of war, smuggled into a VA hospital in a veteran's personal effects. They got the veteran onto a gurney. They got him to trauma. They got Danielle's shoulder sutured in the ER while she sat on a stool in a paper gown, the room spinning slightly from blood loss and adrenaline, her voice still that low command tone that didn't belong to any nurse they'd hired. Dr. Whitfield stood in the doorway watching. She could feel his eyes on her like cold fingers. He wasn't concerned. He was calculating. She understood then. Not consciously, but the way you understand something when you've been hunted before. He'd made his calls. Before the ambulance had even left the parking lot, before her shoulder was even bandaged, he'd already been on the phone. To the board. To the state medical board. To whoever owed him favors. An investigation was a weapon. An investigation could dig. An investigation could ask the kinds of questions that pulled at threads until entire identities unraveled. By dawn, her references were being contacted. Former addresses. Employment history. Background checks running backward through 5 years of civilian nursing work, looking for inconsistencies, looking for the seams in her story. Looking for the truth underneath. She'd been ordered to disappear after her Special Forces Unit's classified operation in Marjah was erased from official records, the military scrubbing her existence so thoroughly that Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross ceased to exist on paper. No retirement ceremony. No official DDL 214. Just a handshake in a secure facility in Arlington and a new social security number and a civilian life that was supposed to stay small and quiet and invisible. Now an investigation was going to drag her into the light she'd been commanded to avoid. She sat alone in an all-night diner 6 blocks from Seattle General. The clock on the wall read 03 for 7 hours. Her coffee had gone cold in the cup, a thin skin forming on its surface, and she stared at her hollow-eyed reflection in the window glass. The fluorescent lights of the diner made her look like a ghost. Like something that had already died and nobody had told it yet. Across the street, a dark sedan sat parked in an empty lot. She could see it in the window's reflection. 2 people inside. Not obvious. Not yet. But soon they would be obvious. Soon the federal investigators that Dr. Whitfield had called would have enough questions that they'd need to ask her directly. And when they asked, she would have to answer, and when she answered, everything would come apart. The coffee was cold. The reflection was hollow. And in 3 hours, her life was going to change in ways she couldn't control, couldn't plan for, and couldn't escape. But that wasn't the worst part. The hospital lobby television flickered to life at 0600 hours, the morning news anchor's voice cutting through the quiet of the pre-shift lull. Danielle had just stepped through the sliding glass doors, her left shoulder wrapped in bandages beneath her scrubs, her hair still damp from the shower she'd taken in the staff locker room at 0530. She wasn't supposed to be here. The suspension notice had been waiting in her personal email at 0247 hours, administrative leave pending investigation. She'd come anyway, because the veteran in room 347 had requested to see her, and she wasn't the kind of person who ignored that kind of call. The cafeteria was nearly empty. A janitor mopped near the entrance. One nurse sat at a corner table, her face buried in her phone. That's when the breaking news graphic filled the screen, red banner across the bottom, urgent music underneath. We're receiving reports that the Department of Defense is seeking information on a decorated Special Forces combat medic missing since a classified operation 5 years ago, the anchor said. Danielle's step didn't falter. But her hand instinctively moved to her shoulder. The photograph appeared on screen. Her service photo. Younger. Harder. In navy dress uniform, eyes that looked like they'd already seen the worst humanity had to offer. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, United States Navy Special Warfare Command. The name they'd told her to forget. The name that officially didn't exist. The name she'd buried under scrubs and quiet shifts and a false identity that was supposed to last forever. Damn, she whispered. Not a prayer. Not panic. Acknowledgement. Like a soldier acknowledging incoming fire. She should leave. She should walk out through the employee entrance and drive north until she found an empty motel with cash-only payments and no questions. Her hands were steady as she continued toward the elevators, but that steadiness wasn't composure, it was the trembling restraint of a woman who'd already survived worse. The trembling wasn't fear. It was the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the absolute worst. The lobby was still quiet. The morning shift hadn't arrived yet. Just her and the janitor and the news anchor's voice describing how federal investigators had received an automated alert when certain keywords appeared in a complaint to the state medical board. Words like suspicious background. Words like unclear employment history. Words like the kind of thing that triggered watch lists for missing military personnel. Danielle understood immediately. Whitfield's investigation had set this in motion. His careful sabotage had been competent enough to trip federal systems he didn't even know existed. He tried to destroy her career and accidentally summoned the entire United States military. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. That's when the sound came from the lobby behind her. Not one pair of boots. Not a small group. The sound of 200 pairs of boots hitting polished tile in synchronized rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. The percussion of a military formation moving as a single organism. The sound like a tank engine idling in a garage, mechanical, powerful, impossibly controlled. Danielle's eyes closed for exactly 1 second. The elevator doors began to close. Then she pressed the button to reopen them. She turned around. The main entrance doors had opened completely. 200 military personnel in dress uniforms began filtering through Seattle General's entrance, their formation so precise it looked choreographed. They moved like apex predators moving through tall grass, every step deliberate, every angle calculated, every movement speaking of years of training that transcended individual will and became something collective. Officers in service dress blues. Enlisted personnel in identical uniforms. Combat medics with patches on their sleeves. Rangers with the distinctive black and gold. SEALs with the quiet bearing of men who operated in spaces most people never knew existed. The formation split. As it moved deeper into the lobby, creating a corridor of humanity that ran from the main entrance directly toward the elevators. Toward her. A Navy SEAL stepped forward from the crowd. 6'2", shoulders that made his uniform seem tailored to fit a wider world than most people inhabited, eyes the color of cold Arctic water. He walked through the formation like it parted for him the way Moses' sea had parted. He stopped 15 feet from the elevator, locked eyes with Danielle, and spoke one word across the silence that had descended on the lobby like snow on a battlefield. Phantom 7. The code name. The call sign from Marjah. From the operation that didn't exist. From the 5 years she'd spent trying to be someone else. Danielle's face didn't move. But her right hand gripped the elevator frame just a fraction tighter. The veteran security guard who'd been working the lobby desk for 3 years, a man who'd done 2 tours in Iraq and kept that fact to himself the way most good soldiers kept their service close, stood up from his chair. He was 73 years old and had seen enough of war to recognize it when it walked through his doors. He snapped to attention with a bearing that hadn't left his body in 47 years. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, he announced, and his voice was the kind of voice that made the hospital staff turn from their stations like they'd been called. United States Navy Special Warfare Command. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd like wind through wheat. A nurse dropped her iPad. Another grabbed a colleague's arm so hard her fingernails left marks. The fluorescent lights above seemed to hum louder, as if the building itself was recognizing something that had been sleeping inside its walls for 5 years. A 2-star general stepped forward from the formation, his uniform so pressed it could cut glass, his bearing the kind that came from making life-and-death decisions for other people's children. He was holding a manila folder that was at least 2 inches thick. He opened it with the kind of care usually reserved for ancient documents. Master Chief Petty Officer Ross, he said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. Your service record indicates, he paused, and in that pause, the entire lobby held its breath. Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire. Sentence 1. Danielle was transformed. Not physically. Her body hadn't moved. But something shifted behind her eyes, like a door opening onto a room everyone else had missed. Silver Star for gallantry during Operation Phantom 7. Sentence 2. The nurses were crying now. One of them was a veteran. 2 Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in combat. Sentence 3. Dr. Whitfield appeared at the far end of the corridor, having come down from the administrative offices. He saw the formation and immediately turned toward the side exit, walking with the kind of careful casualness that screamed guilt. No one stopped him. Not yet. Additional commendation for medical expertise in field conditions that saved an estimated 847 personnel over multiple deployments. Sentence 4, and now the weight of every life she'd ever held together was in the air between them. The veteran from room 347 appeared in a wheelchair, pushed by 2 Marines whose uniforms had the specific cut of men who operated in the darkness. His left arm was still bandaged from the shrapnel, but his right arm was raised. The Ross tattoo was visible on his forearm in block letters that had been there for 5 years. They looked like a prayer. Phantom 7, he said, his voice thick with something between gratitude and awe. You carried me 11 clicks through enemy fire. After I stepped on that IED. You took a bullet in your leg and didn't stop moving until I was on the helicopter. He looked at the assembled crowd, at the 200 military personnel in their dress uniforms, at the hospital staff standing frozen. She saved my life. And then she came here and became invisible. She chose to be invisible. And this hospital treated her like she was nothing. 10 seconds of absolute silence. The kind of silence that happens when the world realizes it's been looking at something important and seeing nothing at all. The kind of silence that exists in the space between who someone pretends to be and who they actually are. Then the lobby erupted. Not chaos. Not confusion. But recognition. Applause that started with the Marines and spread through the formation like fire finding dry wood. Officers removed their covers in salute. The SEAL who'd spoken her code name came to attention. The general continued reading her complete service record to the assembled crowd, each word another piece of the puzzle she'd tried to hide. And Danielle Ross stood in the elevator doorway, her wound throbbing beneath the bandage, her 5-year-old false identity crumbling to dust in real time, and understood with perfect clarity that some secrets are too big to keep. Some truths are too loud to ignore. Some people are too important to remain invisible. True class is what you do when the lights go out. The federal investigators moved through Seattle General's lobby like a tide, their badges catching the fluorescent light as they approached the hospital board president where he stood frozen beside Dr. Whitfield. The lead investigator, a woman with steel-gray eyes and hands that had handled worse than paperwork, unfolded a folder thick as a phone book. "Your complaint to the state medical board triggered a standard audit," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Seattle General's billing practices over the past 6 years. What we found was not standard. The numbers came out like artillery fire, $2 million in fraudulent charges. Unnecessary cardiac procedures on veterans with PTSD who'd been given sedatives during consults and never asked to consent. Inflated imaging studies. Phantom physical therapy sessions billed to Medicare. A kickback arrangement with a medical equipment supplier, $7,000 per month in unmarked payments deposited to a company registered under the hospital board president's sister's maiden name. Every single complaint you filed against Nurse Ross came after she discovered medication discrepancies that would have led us here anyway, the investigator continued. Your timeline shows you made those calls within minutes of her heroic intervention in the OR. The same OR where she saved your patient's life while you froze. The silence in the lobby became a living thing, pressing down from the vaulted ceiling like a physical weight. Dr. Whitfield's breathing came shallow and fast now, his composure collapsing like a building in controlled demolition. The trembling started in his hands, not restraint, but the animal panic of a man watching his entire architecture crumble in real time. The board president was already signing documents, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear, both of them understanding that cooperation was the only remaining card to play. Federal prosecutors don't negotiate with men who stand alone. The investigator stepped closer to Whitfield, her voice dropping to the conversational tone of someone delivering a sentence. Your medical license is suspended effective immediately, pending review by the state medical board. You're not to practice medicine in any capacity until that review concludes. Which, given the evidence, will be never. Security officers, 2 of them, broad-shouldered men in Navy uniforms with the kind of bearing that comes from actual authority, moved to either side of him like tidal markers. They didn't grab him. They didn't need to. The presence of handcuffs was suggestion enough, and Whitfield's wrists rose toward them as if his body had already accepted what his mind was still fighting. The cuffs closed with a sound like a cell door locking, metal on metal, final and absolute. As security escorted him toward the lobby exit, he passed directly in front of Danielle. She stood motionless, her shoulder bandaged beneath her hospital scrubs, her face a mask carved from granite. His lips moved. "You don't understand, I was protecting the hospital's interests," but she simply turned away, a quarter turn of her shoulders that felt more devastating than any words could have been. The dismissal was complete. A janitor moves away from spilled waste. That's what her silence said. Not worth the oxygen required to respond. The 200 military personnel remained at attention in the lobby, a wall of dress uniforms that turned the fluorescent-lit space into something between a ceremony and a reckoning. A Navy SEAL stood nearest to Danielle, his eyes tracking the security officers as they moved Whitfield through the glass doors toward the parking lot where federal vehicles waited in formation. News crews were already positioning themselves outside, cameras catching the moment he emerged in handcuffs, his 6-figure career ending not in a blaze but in the grey light of a Portland morning. By noon, the story had gone national, decorated war hero forced into hiding, working as invisible nurse, exposed while saving same Marine twice. CNN ran the photograph of her in her Navy dress uniform, the one from her service record that had been classified until 3 hours ago. Cable news anchors struggled with the mathematics of it, a Master Chief Petty Officer working 12-hour shifts for $38,000 a year, her existence erased so thoroughly that her own family thought she was dead. "Why come out of hiding now?" one anchor asked the empty studio, and his co-host answered, "Because someone needed saving, and she couldn't not save them." The hospital's chief medical officer approached Danielle where she stood with her arm in a sling, a 2-star general beside her in dress blues so dark they seemed to absorb light. "We want to create a veterans care program," the CMO said carefully, choosing words like someone navigating a minefield. "In your honor. Full staffing, full resources, partnership with the VA and Naval Special Warfare Command. Danielle nodded once, her eyes still tracking the federal vehicles pulling out of the parking lot. The veteran from room 347 wheeled himself forward, his tattooed arm raised, the letters Ross still prominent across his forearm, though his memory of the woman behind the name had been restored to him in a single moment of clarity when she'd been announced. His daughter stood beside his chair, her hand on his shoulder, her eyes wet with the kind of tears that come from understanding that your father had been saved twice by the same woman and only remembered it for the second instance. The general touched Danielle's uninjured shoulder. "Your classified status is being lifted," he said quietly. "We're offering you a position at Naval Special Warfare Command, training the next generation of combat medics. Your rank is restored. Your service record is unsealed. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, you're no longer a ghost." She turned to face him, and something shifted in her eyes, not relief, exactly, but something closer to coming ashore after 5 years adrift. The worn combat boots from Marjah, the one she'd hidden in her locker beneath scrubbed jackets and forgotten dreams, they could finally come home. 6 months later, Danielle walked past a strip mall in a suburb outside Portland, her navy dress uniform crisp beneath a dress coat, her pace steady and purposeful. She was headed to a meeting with hospital administrators who wanted to unveil the new Veterans Care Program, a wing that would bear her name, though she'd requested it be called something less specific, just Warrior's Respite. Through a smudged window of a storefront between a nail salon and a tax preparation office, she spotted Dr. Whitfield sitting at a folding table. The sign above him was handwritten in marker on white poster board, "Insurance, best rates." His tie was loosened. His face had aged a decade in 6 months, the weight loss visible in his cheeks, the kind of gaunt that comes from understanding consequences in their full and terrible totality. He was processing paperwork for low-income clients, his hands moving through forms with the mechanical quality of someone doing penance. He looked up from his table and saw her through the glass. Their eyes met for exactly 3 seconds. His mouth opened as if he might rap on the window, might call out, might explain or apologize or plead for something she didn't have to give. Danielle paused for only a moment, her expression revealing nothing, not satisfaction, not anger, not mercy. She simply turned and kept walking, her stride unchanged, her focus already forward toward the meeting that waited, toward the future that didn't include him. The silence of her indifference was louder than any condemnation could have been. In her new office at Naval Special Warfare Command, located in a building overlooking San Diego Bay where the ocean moved with the same restless energy as combat operations, the worn combat boots from Marjah rested in a shadow box mounted on the wall beside her Navy cross. The boots were finally retired from the darkness of a locker, from the shame of a false identity, from the weight of carrying them like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed. Dust particles floated through the afternoon light that slanted across her desk, catching the glass of the shadow box, illuminating the cracked leather where Afghan sand had worked its way into seams during a war that nobody could talk about. A photograph was pinned beside the shadow box, a recent one, taken just last week. The veteran from room 347 stood upright, his daughter beside him, his tattooed arm around her shoulders. His eyes were clear. His smile was genuine. The caption on the back, written in his careful handwriting, read, "Walking again. Memory intact. Alive because of you. Always." Danielle touched the photograph frame each morning before her first class, a ritual that grounded her in why she'd traded the invisibility of a nurse for the visibility of a legend who trained the next generation to understand that real power wasn't about titles or credentials, it was about the willingness to stand between someone and oblivion. A new class of combat medic trainees waited in the lecture hall downstairs, 23 of them, young and nervous and hungry to learn from someone whose call sign in the classified world had been Phantom 7, a ghost who'd saved 4,847 lives across 3 tours in Helmand Province, Kandahar, and Marjah. They didn't know her rank yet. They didn't know her story yet. They only knew that they'd been selected for the most demanding training program in naval special warfare, taught by an instructor whose reputation was already legend among those who'd survived her teaching. She adjusted her uniform one final time, feeling the weight of her restored rank on her shoulders like a mantle she was finally entitled to wear. Before entering the lecture hall, she placed her hand against the glass of the shadow box where her boots waited, their leather worn smooth by miles of carrying lives to safety. Her fingers traced the glass as if touching through time to the woman she'd been, the woman who'd buried herself to survive. Then she turned toward the door and the classroom beyond, toward the students who would become the next tier of warriors, and took a breath that came from the bottom of her diaphragm, from the space where decisions are made that split the world between before and after. Her first words to them, delivered with absolute calm, with the kind of authority that comes from having already survived the worst the world could offer, fell into the lecture hall like truth itself. True class is what you do when the lights go out. Let me tell you about Marjah. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story about the hidden heroes walking among us. Like this video if you believe that real strength isn't found in titles or uniforms, it's found in the quiet people who show up every single day and do what's right when no one's watching. Comment below, have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you were standing next to? I want to hear your stories.